All right, the room is open and the floor is yours, Todd.
Well, welcome everybody as you're coming in to the main room here. My name is Todd Wagner and I'm with the Council on Undergraduate Research, and I wanted to welcome each of you to today's CUR conversation, Preparing for Failure, which features three of the chapter authors of Confronting Failure, Approaches to Building Confidence and Resilience in Undergraduate Researchers. This CUR conversation is being recorded, and all registrants will be emailed in the coming days a link to the recording once it's been processed and uploaded to our YouTube page. We ask that unless you're sharing your thoughts or questions, you remain muted. And if you need any technical help, Luke Z is here to help you. You can just talk to him directly in the chat. I want to make you aware that this is the second of 4 CUR conversations that we have planned, inspired by our latest publication, Confronting Failure. The remaining 2 will feature other chapter contributors to this outstanding book, and more information on those can be found on CUR's upcoming event webpage. The first one, the recording of the first one can now be found on our YouTube page as well. That was called Failure is Not a Word to Fear. In just a second, we'll introduce in just a few seconds, we'll introduce our authors for today, and then they'll give a brief overview of the chapter. And then afterwards, we'll open it up for your thoughts or questions on their chapters, as well as the larger themes of the book. If you do have a question, you can raise your hand, and you can find that feature under the reactions, or you can simply unmute yourself and ask a question, or I will also be monitoring the chat, and you can place a question there. I just want to remind you that Confronting Failure is an open access book, and that means anyone, CUR member or not, can get a free copy of the book, and that's found at cur.org/bookstore. All right, well, let's introduce our authors for today. Our first up is Heather Townsend. Heather, if you'll introduce yourself briefly.
Hi, thank you for coming today. My name is Heather Townsend. I'm a full professor at the Community College of Rhode Island. It is the state's only community college and the largest one in New England. I'm very thankful and appreciative to work there. I am mainly teaching an introductory microbiology course. I teach organismal biology and then a human health and disease course as well there. And one of the biggest things that I really try to do as much as I can is incorporate as many high impact practices in my courses as possible.
And Caroline.
Hi, everybody. I'm Caroline Ketchum. I'm at Elon University, and I'm a full professor in the Department of Exercise Science. And Eric and I co-direct Elon Brain Care Research Institute. And I do a lot of work. My disciplinary work is in how the brain controls movement, but I also have done a lot of research and implementation of high impact practices across the years. Glad to be here.
Thanks. And then Eric.
Hello, I'm Eric Hall, also professor of exercise science at Elon University. I'm also newly the director of undergraduate research here. As Caroline said, we co-direct the Elon Brain Care Research Institute, which is sort of a little bit of a case study that we talked about in our chapter. This topic of resilience is something that I'm somewhat familiar with. My training is in exercise science as a sport and exercise psychologist. So the ideas of resilience and confidence and things like that sort of falls well into some of my academic training also.
What? And then Heather, your chapter was chapter 3, and it's called Redesigning Failure, Preparing Research Students for the, oh dear goodness, I knew this was going to happen to me, oh dear goodness, inevitable.
Yeah.
Tell us more. Give us a quick pitch of the chapter.
Sure. So I have a little background. In 2005, I attended a summer institute at the University of Texas to develop a CUR, which is a course-based undergraduate research experience for my introductory microbiology course. And it was a really pretty intense 4-day workshop. And at the end of it, I had a project that I thought I wanted to implement, and I went back to my university, and I had 2 honor students that I had come on to run it through in the semester, just to make sure that when I implemented it, there wasn't any kinks and I was prepared. I tend to be an over preparer. So I hate like things that just don't go perfectly as planned, right? But I guess that's the theme of this is failures, okay. And so one of the research students heard portion of it. It was great. So next semester, I implemented into my course. I had an entire semester planned in the lab, completely redesigned the lab. And all of a sudden, we had results day where all the students came in to read their plates, and probably half of the students, something went wrong. Either there was growth from contamination on the plate, or they didn't get these great zones of inhibition that they wanted to. So I had basically Petri dishes that they swabbed with 6 different species of bacteria, and then they put discs that they soaked in different spices to test whether it inhibited the bacteria from growing. And so a couple of the groups had these great areas that the spice actually would not allow the bacteria to grow. And then some of them had 0. And they, all of a sudden started talking about, we failed. I didn't get the results we didn't get results. And I sat there for a minute and I said, man, I did not even prepare myself for this. Never mind prepare the students that this is okay. Sometimes when I didn't anticipate failure, and I did not prepare them for that either. And I said, in this case, it's okay that you did not get results, because then we know that spice isn't effective, right? Just like, an antibiotic that they're testing out on a new type of, bacterial infection, knowing which ones don't work is just as powerful as knowing which ones work. And so it sounds greatly prepared now, but it was not like that when that day of the lab. I was kind of freaking out and I felt so bad for them. And so I wanted to kind of show students that you can learn from negative results, right? You can learn from things that don't go as planned. Failure is a learning experience, and I think it's an inevitable and one that needs to happen in a lot of different types of science-based courses. And so I really tried to thoughtfully change students' perception of failure from then on out. I actually deliberately had an entire PowerPoint that I went over about examples of failure in research and how we've learned from them over the years, and that it's, we would not be where we were if we did not have failure. So I really just kind of redesigned how I prepared them for it. And now, we literally just started it a couple of weeks ago in my courses, and my students this last week all of a sudden had an experiment not work, and they were like, oh, it's okay. They just felt much more confident in that failing piece. And so my chapter does talk a little bit about that and goes into a little bit more detail on that as well.
Eric and Caroline, tell us a little bit about your chapter. It's chapter 16, A Community of Scholars Approach to Building Resilience and Overcoming Failures Through Undergraduate Research and Mentoring.
Caroline tagged me and said that I was responsible for it. I usually tell her that she gets up to summarize, but today I'll take over responsibility for that. So good to see everybody. As Caroline and I mentioned before, we co-direct the Elon Brain Care Research Institute. And just give a little context about that. And we both have done a lot of work on implementation of high impact practices, and thinking specifically, both of us, with undergraduate research mentoring. And in our research lab, if you'll call it that, we have we co-mentor pretty much all the students. We have multiple students in there, so it's a lab-based model. So it's a typical science model. Originally, the nexus of it was we did a lot of research with concussions and student athletes. It's an opportunity that we provide a service to our institution, to our sports medicine staff for varsity athletics, but also for our club sports to do concussion testing, and then some various other projects around that. And then in the last 5 to 7 years, we've branched out a little bit into thinking about mental health on our campus. And some of that comes from work that Caroline led on our campus around student well-being with other faculty and staff on our campus. And, so mental health really became it's a very important topic of college students. And it just seemed like a good place for us to start thinking about it from a research standpoint, and how that meshes up a little bit with our work on concussions, but really sort of separately. And one of the things that happened through the work that Caroline was doing, our institution instituted an act, belong, commit framework, which is sort of act, do something, belong, do something with somebody, and then do something meaningful. And really it's just sort of based on general psychological principles as far as how to be successful, how to have positive well-being, how to build resilience and thrive in any population. And it's adopted internationally in Scandinavia and Australia and some other places. But our campus has sort of adopted the framework to think of how to build our student well-being. So that has been in our mind, and we talk to our students a lot about well-being. We have conversations about them, what their well-being, and just making sure they're okay. And when they're failing, as Heather gave some great examples. It's not really failures, but sometimes it's perceived to be, is like how to help them rethink that. And we also been thinking about a lot about people are familiar with the salient practices framework, 10 salient practices. Jenny Shanahan and I and a few other co-authors wrote a paper about the 10 salient practices of undergraduate research mentoring. And I, especially now that in my role as director of undergraduate research, I think about this a lot as a way to teach people how to mentor, but also just being intentional about what we do as mentors. And Caroline and I, one day, literally over a beer, we're just sort of talking about how these frameworks sort of mesh onto each other, right? And that there's great synergy here between how we can think about these practices and how we can do it in a way that it builds resilience and helps out with mental health and those types of things. So this chapter was one of the places that we've tried to put those ideas into place. And as I said before, I think another thing that we really, with this chapter, tried to focus on was this team approach. I talk about this concept of team resilience, which I came across in a sports psychology textbook when I was teaching at one time, and was in the back of my head. And then when we were thinking about this chapter, I was like, this fits really well because there's multiple teams here. There's a team of Caroline and I and how we sort of frame our research and how we frame these experiences for our students. There's the team aspect of the students who are all doing, there's like a core research project, and then they all have their parts of it that they're doing. And then there's the interactions between us. And it just seemed like it really lended itself nicely. And we really started thinking about how we could develop and talk about, what we're inherently doing around this idea of team resilience in the context of these two broader frameworks. And I hope it made sense to people. So, but I think, we were really trying to think about, how can we mentor our undergraduate research in ways that can be just beneficial for our students, besides just student success. I'll let Caroline add anything else that I missed there.
I will just say, Eric, you'll get to know us in this short hour, but we're pretty wide open. And so part of this is allowing students to see us fail in front of each other. And so this co-mentoring and working together is really trying to create a community of mentoring so that everybody in the room has skills to add, knowledge to add, and it's trying not to be such a top-down power structure. And that's been really successful for us.
Yeah, and I'll just say that when we talk about co-mentoring, Caroline's done a lot of work on this. I mean, it's really what we're talking about is mentoring when we're both in the room, rather than sometimes people might have multiple mentors, and maybe for one part of the project, they're going over here and talking to this person somewhere else for another part of it. But usually when we're talk about co-mentoring, it's usually we're in the room, we're keeping each other in, if somebody has to miss a meeting, we're keeping each other in touch with what's going on, or what the concerns are from the student, or what the successes are of the students, that when we see them, we can celebrate them also.
So that's our introduction piece. The remaining time is really up to you for your thoughts, for your questions, you can share a story and try to pick their brains for advice. But as you get ready to ask your questions, let me ask the group this. How were you approached to be in the book to begin with? Was there a call for submissions? Did you already have an article that you thought would be a good fit for the book? Like, what was that process like a little bit? And I'll let the three of you fight over who gets to go first.
I'll go. Go ahead, Caroline.
I was just going to say, Eric finds calls and then he brings them to me and says, hey, we should do something here. And we had been thinking about this and written a short blog. And so I think this was an opportunity to write a bigger conversational paper of our model. And I think we'll continue to try to write in this space a little bit more and build it out and hopefully collect some data down the road. But that's how we work. We have good ideas and we sort of start to snowball them. But he's typically the one who finds the great spot to put it. So.
Yeah, so I get the CUR emails. I'm on the email list, and so there was an email sent out about the call for the paper or for the chapter. So that's how I found out about it. And same thing, I've always tried to think about this, and so it's kind of a great way for me to be able to actually put it on paper, right? Professors, I feel like we always have these great ideas, and we don't typically write everything down and disseminate and share. And so this was a great way for me to do this.
Well, if any of you have thoughts or questions or scenarios you want them to weigh in on, now is your time. I'm new to undergraduate research. It's not my background. And so I have all sorts of notes and highlights. So I will ask plenty of questions, but I know this is your time as well. So feel free to just raise your hand. Oh, Eric's waving at me already. Eric's ready to jump in. Go, Eric.
I'll start with a question directed towards Heather. Someday I might pick your brain a lot because we're really trying to think about how to incorporate course embedded research onto our campus. It's one of our strategic plans and is now falls into my lap. It's something I have to think a lot more about. But I'm really curious about the context and this idea of failure that you sort of talk about, how high achieving students react when you sort of talk about that, because I think there's such an angst for them oftentimes because of grades and things like that. Like I can't fail. I there's no way I can be wrong. So I'm just curious if you might be able to talk a little bit about that.
Oh, I'd love to. So, so I am at a community college, and the micro course I teach is definitely designed for the nursing students, which again, they want that high grade because some of them have not been admitted into the program yet. And so I have this, have a very real talk with them about, what grades mean, and so in my course, we have exams, we have lab reports, we have pre-labs, quizzes, and then this CUR is a pretty big part of it because I would rather them have this huge critical thinking component to the lab than just answering some, cookbook lab questions that I have designed as well. And I tell them that with this, if there is any failure with results, that is not counted negatively towards your grades. Your grades have there's nothing in your grades that is structured around what you actually get for results. It's literally what you're telling me about those results. And that makes them very receptive to it because they are. Before I kind of thought about this and really preparing them for this, I feel like there was this pressure of I have to get results. And I also do bring in ethics a lot as well. I have a whole ethics segment that I get into about why we need to be truthful as scientists and researchers as well, and how in the past, there are history of scientists that don't get the results they want and budget to make it look good. And I say in this course, we don't need results. We don't. This is not groundbreaking research. This is just to get you really prepared for understanding critically about the content.
Thanks, that's great. I love the process orientation towards that.
So something that Eric and Caroline did say that also kind of, brought something up in my head too, is that growth mindset. So I have my kids go to school and they come home, and my little kids, I have 5 little kids, and they all come home and they'll talk about, and we learned about growth mindset and how it's so important to be positive. And at some point, I said we can do this in college as well, right? So you guys talk about mental health and about well-being. And so I've also incorporated talking about a growth mindset, and because a lot of my students, they're coming from backgrounds that have not supported them very well for the college endeavor. And so, I talk to them about how you can all be scientists, right? You don't have to be a science major, you can do it. And just about having that positive growth mindset. So I really like that you guys talked about well-being. Do you guys ever have any talks about, do you ever call it growth mindset with your students and talk about it in that sense?
Yeah, we do. One of the things that we implement that I think has been really fun is books. So we'll often read books together as a group that is not related to the research necessarily at all. But on these topics of resilience or grit or joy, fun. We're very playful and trying to think about sort of the tenets of act, belong, commit, and have them, it's important to have hobbies. So the growth mindset can extend beyond the classroom and the research experience. So trying to learn something new and how important that is. I think that also having those conversations with them of how that translates to different contexts. So I think you can practice these things in some safe spaces like your class, right? But how does that translate out when things might have real consequences, and how to fail forward, I think is important.
And I think that's actually one of the advantages of, we talk specifically in this book about the model where we are co-mentoring, is that because we practice that when we're mentoring the students, is that always trying to learn more and really trying to value each other's expertise. We have very different expertise that we were trained in, but there's an intersection of ideas that we have. And that doesn't mean we also don't mentor students separately, but we do, most of our mentoring ends up being together. But I think it's for lots of reasons. I mean, students are interested in our topic. We enjoy working with one another. We see the value of it and see, what the outcomes of it can be, and trying to help students navigate, being in college. I mean, the project that we're talking about, is very different from, Heather, than what you have with a CUR, right? It's a one semester experience where you have them. I mean, what we're talking about with Caroline and I is most of our students are with us for 3, 4, 5, 6 semesters, right? I mean, so it's something that we build it over time also. So it's not just a one semester that come into our lab, they do something, they leave. It's really trying to, develop their ideas from ideation to presentation of some sort, dissemination of that research, which is not always possible.
I had a question. Thank you all. I'm really excited to be learning from you. I'm a new assistant director in undergraduate research, and I'm currently at Princeton, which is a very different environment for me because I'm a first-gen college student who went to Bridgewater State and benefited greatly from Jenny Shanahan's programming there when I was an undergrad. And so we have a program where we connect grad students and postdoc researchers to undergraduates in their first and second year as mentors. And so we kind of have these two populations that are very anxious about success and very worried about failure. And so I was wondering if any of you had any advice on how we can initiate these conversations with new mentors that are developing their mentorship skills to make sure that they're not modeling this fear of failure for undergrads.
So one of the things that comes to mind is transparency, really, so showing times that you have failed. So I will always start out the failure conversation with my students with the one time in grad school that I thought I was going to quit because all of my samples that I had been collecting, blew up in the thermocycler. And I was like, this is horrible. And why am I here doing this? And so, by giving them examples, I feel like it normalizes it and they feel a little bit more comfortable, like, oh, okay, well, even, my professor, who should be perfect in their eyes, none of us are, right? But, they have this, they always think of that. And so by showing them your vulnerability and the times that you have failed before, I think really does kind of ease that uneasiness, really. Yeah,
it's really the anti-Instagram, right? I mean, it's really trying to show what actually happens to get there. About 5 or 6 years ago, I remember that there was somebody who talked about their failure CV. And it's something that I know Caroline and I both sometimes will talk to students about. And, it's this idea of, all the, we do human research, so all the participants who don't show up, all the people who don't answer a question or don't do what they were supposed to do. But then it's, all the applications that you apply for and you don't get, and the grants you don't get, and the rejections on paper, and reviewer number 2, and all those things. I mean, that all adds up. And it's just sort of like, it's important to sort of remind them that it's sort of normal, and then try to normalize it a little bit to help them see that that's the only way that things can move forward. And there's a reason why all that happens too. I mean, it's how we learn. That's how we become resilient, right? But you have to have the mindset that, yeah, you can't be perfect. And you can't be perfect, especially when you think about research and creative inquiry, that there's always going to be setbacks that happen.
You know, Eric and I are in the same department and have younger faculty, and I think they look at us as all success. And so even talking to our colleagues about things that we've tried for and failed at. I have a colleague who says research is all about failure, right? It's research. Otherwise, we just call it search. And so it is part of the process. I think what we have to be careful of, and what I'm trying to grapple with, is we do want to normalize it, but we also have to acknowledge that it hurts, right? That there is like, that it does set you back. If you are a PhD student and it takes a year off your project, it's a big failure. And so how to also help put it in context. And I think that's a big part of what Heather's talking about, of that growth mindset. There are some big failures and some small failures. And if we can help people practice those small ones, it gives them some tools for the big ones.
So what blows me away about this book is just the like great inclusion of the disciplines, of the different institutional types, of different undergraduate research experiences, environments that can happen. And to watch the word failure, which I had a very clear definition of what failure means in my mind, and then from chapter to chapter, watch it morph and change a little bit, just a little bit. I'm wondering though, Heather, I loved how in your chapter there was failure, but there was also, it was more of just perceived failure, right? Like the spice didn't work. There was actually nothing that they failed at in the project itself. It was just this perceived failure of, why didn't this work? Is there, from your experience, is there any difference from perceived failure and how you respond to that versus an actual failure and the lab results are wrong because they skipped step 3 or something?
I think that usually if it's something they did wrong, they didn't, flame the loop in between inoculating and there's growth, I think they usually are a little bit harder on themselves than the perceived failure, because then in there, if I'm framing it correctly to them, then they understand that perceived failure is okay. But I also, one of the big things for a CUR is allow for them to basically redo, iterations, to basically redo experiments. So I have it built into my course that we have a full week where I don't have anything planned really. I always have a backup, but I say, look, this is your week, that if something didn't work right, we are not behind. You're not behind if you actually did something, wrong with the experiment. And that also kind of eases them a little bit and say, okay, at least I know I have that makeup week, that if there was something that went wrong, that we have that. So I think that helps a little bit too.
And then I'll ask all 3 of you this, but Heather, your chapter I thought was interesting because you mentioned you were using, in essence, this prepared, I forget the exact language, but it was a prepared like lab set. Like it was something that you could almost just purchase and it's supposed to work, kind of a thing. And so for that perceived failure to happen in that scenario, so as professors, if you're doing something you've done 100 times before and failure happens in that scenario, is that different than when you're trying something new, or you maybe have this little side group of students that are experimenting and trying something and they fail in that? Like, is your own internal response to that failure different to where it's like, this wasn't supposed to fail, what went wrong, versus, oh, of course they were failing, they were pushing the edge of complexity somewhere in our lab or whatnot?
I mean, I think there's place for both. I have this distinct memory when I was in grad school. We were doing a graded exercise test. So people might be familiar with this. This is basically an exercise test to determine fitness level of people. And you have to, in this case, they were running and kept on increasing speed and incline until the person was done. And, grad school, we were testing fellow grad students, and my colleague and I, who's now a dean, we're testing one of our friends on the test, and at the end of the test, we realized my colleague never gave him the nose clip to make sure that he couldn't breathe through his nose during the exercise test, which made it a completely invalid test, right? It's something so small that, but it's so easy to overlook one time, right? And you do it one time because you never do it again. And to this day, 25, 30 years after this, whenever my one friend sees the other friend, it's like he gets anxious because of that one time that he didn't put a nose clip on him to because it was a failure in his mind. And it's like, yeah, it's not going to be the last time, but it's sort of like something it's just so ingrained, but it happens. It's like, yeah, you maybe you're more willing to forgive yourself if it's something they've never done before, but it's still the same, right? It's still same teaching moment. And I think that's our job as mentors, is to help normalize that and sort of say, hey, yeah, you made a mistake there. You didn't get this data point or whatever it is. It won't happen again, right? You learn from it.
I think there's a lot of framing here for students. I mean, we're problem solvers at heart. So if you know exactly what went wrong, that's one thing. But if you don't, and you have to figure out, is this the data? Is it something that I did? I know, in part of our salient practices, we're really talking to students about writing down your methods, right? So that you can do it the same or other people can do it. Some of these things that when you're embedded in the process, you're like, I will never forget that. I totally know how I've named all my files until I go back to look at my files and I don't know if the final was the final or the just one final, and so helping students think through those processes that we all go through of sometimes you might make that failure, but it's writing down the recipe for your research or whatever it is, so that you can remember how to do it right the next time.
I do a lot of pre-planning with them too. Like I'll have them, I love that you mentioned the materials and methods and stuff, because I'll say to them, I want you to write up your material and methods before lab. And then when you get in lab, what changed? Did you follow all them right along or did you not? And then to go along with that, what do you expect to get for results? And if you don't get those results, I want you to have time to critically think about why you did not get those results. And I think that helps a lot as well.
Can I ask Caitlin a question? I've been thinking about her model a little bit with postdocs. Do the postdocs have mentors themselves in the room or teaching them or thinking of, watching them mentor?
Yeah, so I mean, it varies because this is like a cross-disciplinary program. So the postdocs in the sciences are involved in a lab. They do have, they're on another faculty member's project, generally speaking. And so they have their own advisor. And at times they'll, have meetings, for instance, with their advisor and their mentee to kind of broaden out that relationship. Folks that are in the social sciences or humanities that maybe are running their own projects may not have a mentor that they're connecting students with. But I think that's a really good question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about reflection of observing mentoring or remembering your own mentors, right? And remembering things that were really helpful for you or what you're watching. And I mean, that is sort of one of the tenets of the co-mentoring is it is about intentional faculty development as part of it and really being aware of what are other people doing. My science has gotten better working with Eric in the room and I hope it's reciprocated, right? That we've learned some things from each other that are just passed down through our lineage of research and thinking about that.
Just following up on that, I think it's, when we probably have all had mentors in our past that we draw from and have our mentoring toolkit, but it's nice to be able to talk and to see it in action with other people. And I as Caroline said, I think there's different things that we've taken from each other as far as how we deal with students and how we interact and how we help foster an environment to have them think, maybe more deeply about things. And I think it definitely it's bi-directional. It goes both ways. That there's some things that I have changed how I talk about things and think about things because of what I've seen Caroline do in action.
Caroline and Eric, talk to me a little bit more about act, belong, and commit. Is that a framework that happens in certain classes, or is that a campus-wide framework? Or tell me more about that, because that was quite inspiring to me.
Yeah, I'll take a stab and then Eric can jump in where it doesn't make sense. As a campus, we were really trying to implement a well-being campaign. And most well-being campaigns have the dimensions of wellness. They're very static. And Eric was actually abroad and working with in Denmark and came across this very habit-oriented framework. So it is what mentally healthy people do. And I'll sort of explain the mental health piece here too, because it puts mental health at the pinnacle of well-being, which is actually pretty scary for institutions. I think we're now starting to embrace that and realize mental health is the pinnacle of well-being. And to support mental health, you have to have good nutrition and physical activity and engaging in hobbies and good relationships and all of these factors. So it is an evidence-based framework that a group, Rob Donovan, started with. And it's based on research that they just sort of packaged it to say that to be mentally healthy are engaged in activities, and a variety of activities, potentially along dimensions. They are doing things and in places with people that they belong and have similar interests to and have good relationships. And then there's components of your life that you're really working towards something with purpose and meaning. And so those can thread through. You can have a lot of acts and a few belongs and one or two commit, and they're changing over time. But it's this idea that everybody every day can get up and act, belong, commit. So it is about action, being able to do something, which sometimes means taking a nap or going on vacation. But it is about the habits of wellness, that being in a health behavior field, that's what it's all about. We want people to build healthy habits. Does that,
I'll just piggyback a little bit off what Caroline said there is, so, I was teaching, some people might be familiar with the third-party provider DIS and study abroad in Scandinavia. I was a visiting faculty there teaching a class on physical activity and mental health, and had the opportunity to hear this guy Ziggy Santini speak, who works for the Denmark Public Health Department in the Southern Denmark University, or something along those lines. And he started off the conversation. I think this is something that really was impactful for me, is that, in America, you all don't really understand mental health. And I think he's right on, because if I ask everybody in here, the first thing to say, what's the first word you associate with mental health? I think most people in here would say anxiety, depression, suicide, ideation, something along those lines. But mental health is actually a very positive construct. I mean, if you look at the definitions of mental health that the Surgeon General has and the World Health Organization and other places, I mean, they focus on coping with adversity, being in a meaningful relationship, belonging, being a productive member of society, those types of things. That I think that sometimes we just have this negative connotation towards mental health. And what this framework does is it centralizes that this is something that we all can work on to help us all be better, right? And it doesn't mean that there's not bad mental health. I mean, some people, have mental illness, but it's really a relatively small percent of the population. But if we're all proactive in trying to get better, we can move along the continuum and be more positive. And, in the college context, we're really trying to help our students thrive and be successful. So if we keep that in mind when we're mentoring and thinking about in that context, and when they do have setbacks, which we're sort of talking about here, how to deal with it, and how being, having a high level of well-being is going to be beneficial for that. Everybody wins, right? So, I mean, the framework, is very proactive. I mean, it's something that it's simple. I mean, really, you can't get simpler than ABCs, right? I mean, but it's simple concepts as far as how we can all be better. And you could take mental health out of there, and it's the same thing that we would tell people to do for any other healthy behavior, right? If you're gonna lose weight, you need to exercise, and it'd be better if you did it with somebody and had a goal for it, then you're probably going to be more successful with it, right? And that's for weight loss, but you can just change mental health and substitute that, and it's the exact same thing.
I apologize if this is a political question or a sensitive question, because once again, I'm new to undergraduate research and I never know what's going to set someone off. But Eric and Caroline, your chapter ends with ultimately, such success and high quality mentored research experiences can nurture personal and professional growth in students from a range of backgrounds who are pursuing a variety of career paths. And I would imagine that's just as true of community college students as well. So my question is, I understand undergraduate research is a high impact practice, but it seems like some professors are creating the next generation of professors. And I thought that sentence was really beautiful, as in the ABCs, the undergraduate, like it's good for everyone, no matter what direction they go. So when you get a new class of students in, is your mindset, how do I give them these benefits that I know, or is it to raise the next group of, like, what's kind of the commission behind professor mindships these days? Like, are you trying to raise the next you to take your place eventually, or is it just to prepare them to go wherever they may end up going?
I mean, I've mentored over 100 students, and I think one will outrun me by far. But many of our, I mean, what I will say is our students are also tend to go health professions. In exercise science as a preventative health discipline. I mean, I think it's that translation of what they're learning in the research process to what they're going to use for their career, whatever it is, and their personal thing. And I think this resilience and being able to fail forward is a big part of that. And so I think we are very intentional to help our students understand the translation. And it really doesn't matter what the research project is, it's the process. Very few stay in the research area that they did with us. But it starts to give them a process, and I'm hopeful that it helps them help their team members and create a community of scholars of curiosity wherever they're headed. And so I would say in our context, we're very far from trying to raise the next generation of professors. And if we are, I hope they do it differently than the climate that's out there. So.
I just want to add on, I think Caroline hit it well, but Caroline's really good at articulating this probably better, and she can follow up. But, especially when we're talking about, at different points in time, people need different things, right? So it's really about trying to identify where they are and help them at that moment, but and that changes, right? So it's meeting them where they are and mentoring them at that time point for what they need at that point in time. I mean, I think that's really important for mentorship, is that it's not a one size fits all models. It doesn't mean that we are the best mentors, and we can kind of we've tried to co-mentor, and we've definitely had some failures, but our successes outweigh that. But it's really just sort of always thinking about what they need at that point in time. And yeah, we try to coax them into be the next us, but as she said, our students have a mindset coming in is that they're going to go become a physical therapist or PA or OT or nurse or go to med school, and that's fine. And every once in a while we can sort of coax somebody into going to actually graduate school in kinesiology or nutrition or public health or something like that, and we view that as a win also.
I come from a little obviously different avenue in that, I am at the community college. I am definitely not coaxing them to be the next me. A lot of them are they're in nursing, they're focusing on that, or dental hygiene, respiratory therapy. For me, I just want to give them something that they may not ever have. So a lot of my students will not go on to four-year colleges in order to possibly work with somebody in a research lab. So this is like their almost one and done time to actually perform any type of authentic research experience. And even more so, I really am big on, equity and inclusion, and that this really does include everybody. And I want my students to get their scientific literacy, beef that up so that when they are in a conversation with friends or family, they can actually, articulate this stuff and be able to spread this information, in a positive way. So I think mine's a little bit different. I'd love for them to all become the next me, no lie. I mean, obviously, but the reality is my students, many of them are not going on to four-year colleges. So I think of it a little bit differently.
And I want to say, I mean, I think Eric said it before, but Elon is trying to think about how to do a course embedded to get this opportunity to more students. So we, the mentored experience that we're talking about is for a small subset of students. We have about, I'd say 8 to 10 students a year, and that's high. And we obviously are larger than that. And so I think that there is, again, value of lots of different iterations of what undergraduate research can do. We become very close with our students, but we would like to have a really high quality experience that all of our students can get. And so thinking about how to scale up, I think, is always a challenge in these spaces.
So I'll actually ask you both a question then. So, when my students come into my class, it's the CUR is part of their course. Many of them, all of them, don't even know they're going to be doing this before they sign up for my class. And I will, I have to spend a pretty good amount of time with buy-in, like telling them why I promise you this will work out in the end. And please just trust me that it seems like it's more work, but it's not. And so sometimes it's really hard. I mean, no lie, I have probably 2 students a semester drop my class after the first day and go to a different micro because they don't want to do research and they get really, so I do spend a lot of time with buy-in and showing them how this is really going to help them. So I guess my question to you is that, so your students coming into you, they don't need that buy-in, right? Because do you approach them with this with like, or do they approach you with wanting to work in your labs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mixture of both. Somebody else asked if I can clarify what we mean by 8 to 10 students. So at Elon, we have a research model that our students get credit for this individual experience. So many of our students are mentored by one research mentor, and it's, weekly meetings for an hour together, and they're working on a project. Eric and I have combined that into, we're doing that as a group. So we collectively typically have 8 to 10 students a year that we can handle. We also do some individual mentoring. Some are coming through fellows programs, and so that they have to do a research experience. I would say Eric and I are probably mentors that are taking students from all over. So we mentor students from a lot of different disciplines as part of brain care. And his office has a place where students can look up what research mentors are doing and if they have openings or are willing to talk. And so we sort of try to scaffold that. I do think that some people are tapped, and we're also trying to think of those pipelines of how do we get more equitable access to these experiences. So all good, great questions.
Well, we are nearing our time to the end of our time together. If anyone has any more thoughts or questions, feel free to ask them now. Otherwise, I will tell you the upcoming CUR conversations, part of this Confronting Failure series, are responding to failure on October 6th. And that's focused on keeping the undergraduate researcher in mind when we come up with solutions on pivots and adjustments we need to make. And then later in November 1st is a CUR conversation on mentoring through failure. So feel free to sign up for those as well. Even if you can't attend, but you just want the video link right away, just RSVP for those, and that way you'll get on that video link as well. As soon as this video is processed, we'll send a link out to all of our registrants. But I want to thank so much Caroline and Heather and Eric for your chapter contribute, as well as for taking the time to be with us today. It was wonderful to learn from you and to hear from you. Brilliant. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.